The command came with a sharp crack over the radio, "Take the shot." Captain John Avery raised his rifle, his fingers steady despite the tension in the air. The target stood alone in the desolate wasteland, just a man, though by all accounts, he was far from ordinary. For weeks, reports had come in of this human, unharmed, relentless, and somehow, immune to conventional weapons. But today, the squad was going to end it. "On your mark, Captain," whispered Sergeant Lyle, his voice barely audible over the crackling static. His eyes were wide, focused entirely on the man who stood 100 yards away. Tall, unshaven, his clothes tattered from months in the wild. "Ready," John replied, adjusting his sights. They had no idea what they were up against. No one did. But they had their orders, and nothing could prepare them for the shock they were about to face. The wind picked up, rustling the dry, lifeless brush around them. The human didn't flinch, didn't move, as if he had already accepted his fate. Maybe he was tired of running. Maybe he had given up hope. Bang! The bullet tore through the air, striking the man square in the chest. There was a brief moment of silence, then the sound of the bullet ricocheting off the ground. He didn't fall. John's heart skipped. Impossible. Sergeant Lyle was the first to speak, his voice shaking. It should have gone through him. The man stood there, still. Then, unexpectedly, a smile spread across his face. A chilling, unnatural grin that sent a wave of unease through the squad. Laughter. It started low, almost a chuckle, but it grew louder. The man laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He clutched his chest where the bullet had hit, but it didn't seem to faze him. The laugh echoed across the barren desert, sending a ripple of fear through the soldiers. Is he crazy?" Lyle asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shut up." John barked, still aiming his rifle at the man, who was now walking toward them, completely unbothered by the bloodstains spreading on his clothes. The human wasn't running, wasn't retreating. He wasn't even wounded. The soldiers stood frozen, the weight of what they were seeing too much to comprehend. Their target, their enemy, wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The laughter continued, growing louder with each step he took toward them, and that grin, so wide, so unnatural, never faded. "How is this possible?" whispered Lieutenant Bailey, her voice a mix of awe and fear. John's heart was pounding in his chest. He had seen death before, fought battles with real enemies. But this wasn't just any man. This was something beyond human. Something unexplainable. And now, they were facing it. The human continued his relentless advance, laughing the entire time. It wasn't madness. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something darker. And just as John felt his resolve start to crack, a cold realization washed over him. This was not the man they had come to defeat. This was a test. A test to see if they were strong enough to face the unimaginable. The man was almost upon them now. And the soldiers, though trained for combat, prepared for anything, couldn't help but feel the fear creep into their hearts. They had shot him. They had done everything right. But the man just laughed. And kept on coming. John Avery's hands trembled on the rifle. He couldn't believe his eyes. The man was still coming, unfazed, blood dripping from his chest where the bullet had struck. His laugh echoed louder now, mocking them, resonating in the hollow silence of the desert. "Fire again!" John shouted, his voice breaking the spell that had gripped the soldiers. But his command came too late. The man was already too close. Sergeant Lyle fired. The shot rang out, but it was futile. The bullet missed. The man sidestepped effortlessly, his movements graceful and deliberate, as though he knew exactly what was going to happen. His laughter never ceased, as if he found their panic utterly amusing. "We need to get out of here." Lieutenant Bailey yelled, fear creeping into her voice. The soldiers began to back away, forming a tight circle around the man. Their guns trembled in their hands as they tried to line up a clear shot, but every attempt to stop the man only seemed to make him more amused. It was as if he were toying with them, letting them waste their ammunition on him as if he were invincible. John's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. They had never encountered anything like this. The man wasn't just surviving their attacks, he was thriving. His confidence was unnerving, his laughter a reminder of how little they understood about the creature they were facing. The reality of the situation hit John hard. There were no reinforcements coming. No backup. It was just them, surrounded by a force they couldn't fight, couldn't explain. But then, something changed. The man stopped in his tracks. His laughter slowed, and for the first time, his eyes locked onto John's with an intensity that chilled him to the bone. The grin faded from the man's face, replaced by something else, something far more terrifying. His gaze was empty, hollow, as if it saw right through John, into the very core of his being. You don't get it, do you? The voice that came from the man wasn't what John expected. It wasn't loud or crazy. It was calm, too calm. John took a step back, his throat dry. Who are you? The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, pulling the blood-stained fabric away from his chest. The wound wasn't healing. No, it wasn't even there anymore. The skin was perfectly intact. The blood, frozen in place like a bad memory, seemed to disappear the moment it hit the air. It was as if the very act of wounding him had no meaning. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't human. This isn't about me, the man said slowly, his voice unnerving in its quiet. It never was. The soldiers were frozen. They had no idea what he was talking about. It wasn't just the mystery of who this man was that terrified them, it was what he was saying. It never was. It felt like a warning. Or worse, like they were walking into something far bigger than they could comprehend. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind died down. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then the man moved again, but this time he wasn't laughing. The eerie calmness in his eyes deepened, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "What you've done is nothing. You are not the ones who need to fear. You will understand soon enough." And with that, he turned around and began walking away. Slowly at first, then faster. He walked, his footsteps steady and assured as if he had nothing to fear. "Don't let him get away," Sergeant Lyle shouted, snapping out of his trance. John was already in motion, his training kicking in. They couldn't let him leave. Not after everything. Not after what they had witnessed. But as they gave chase, something strange happened. The man's silhouette blurred, the edges of his form warping as though reality itself couldn't hold him in place. It was as if his body was dissolving into the very air. "Wait!" John shouted. "What is happening?" Lieutenant Bailey was the first to stop, her face pale. "Something isn't right. We need to regroup." But John couldn't focus on that. His mind was reeling. The man had just vanished before their eyes. There were no footsteps in the sand. No trace left behind. It was as though he had never been there at all. This doesn't make sense," Lyle muttered under his breath. "He was just here. We all saw it." John clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. "Get your bearings, everyone. He's gone, for now. But whatever he is, we need to find answers. Before it's too late." The squad stood still, disoriented and shaken. What they had just witnessed was impossible. A human, or at least someone who appeared to be human, impervious to bullets, capable of disappearing without a trace. It didn't add up. They had seen people die. They had seen soldiers survive the impossible. But this was beyond comprehension. The silence of the desert seemed to mock them as they regrouped, unsure of what had just happened, but equally certain that it was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. They had made one mistake already. They had underestimated the man they had shot. And now, they would have to deal with the consequences. The hours following the man's disappearance were the longest of their lives. By the time they returned to camp, no one spoke much. Each soldier had witnessed something they couldn't explain, and all of them were haunted by the same thought: was it over? The night fell without a single word exchanged between the soldiers. John stood by the fire, staring into the flickering flames, trying to piece together the fragments of the encounter. He couldn't shake the memory of the man's eyes. Hollow. Empty. It was as if the very essence of humanity had been drained from him. But the questions didn't stop. What was he? How could he just vanish like that? The answers they sought didn't lie in their training, their weapons, or their knowledge of the desert. This was something entirely new. John wasn't a religious man, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had just scratched the surface of something far bigger. Something beyond human comprehension. But as much as his mind raced, the reality of their situation hung over him like a storm cloud. Lieutenant Bailey had the same restless look in her eyes as John. She walked over to him, her steps silent against the desert floor. "What do you think he meant? You're not the ones who need to fear. You will understand soon enough." John shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we're about to find out." They stood in silence for a few moments, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Bailey's face hardened. "This doesn't feel like something we can handle. Whatever he is, he's not just a man. He's something else." "We've dealt with things before," John replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "This is different. It's not just a threat. It's like it's playing with us. Toying with us." Bailey narrowed her eyes. "You think this is some kind of game to him?" John didn't respond. His mind was working through every angle, but each idea only led to more questions. The man, if that's even what he was, wasn't behaving like any enemy they had ever faced. His power, his ability to heal so quickly, his strange disappearance, it was like they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. The next morning, the squad was on edge. The tension in the air was thick. They had to figure out what to do next, but no one had any answers. The only thing that was certain was that they couldn't just sit around and wait for the man to return. They needed to act. John convened a meeting in the makeshift command tent. "All right, listen up. We don't know who or what that man was, but we can't afford to ignore it. We need to track him down, find out who he really is. If he's part of some sort of operation, we need to get ahead of it." Lieutenant Bailey spoke up. "But what if we're dealing with something we can't fight? What if this man isn't human? What do we do then?" John met her gaze. "We don't have the luxury of worrying about that right now. We need information. We need to know how to stop him before it's too late." The squad nodded in agreement, but there was a sense of unease that hung over them all. They didn't know what they were up against, and the unknown was a much scarier opponent than any they had fought before. Over the next few days, they scoured the desert. They searched for any sign of the man, hoping to find some clue that would explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No trace. No footprints in the sand. It was as if he had never existed at all. Then, just as they were about to give up, a breakthrough came. One of the soldiers, Corporal Miller, found something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to raise more questions. A small, glowing fragment of metal, half buried in the sand. This wasn't here before," Miller said, holding it up. "I think this is the key." John's heart raced. He hadn't expected to find anything, but this was it. This was the sign they had been searching for. The fragment was unlike anything he had seen before, shiny and smooth, almost metallic, but with a strange energy radiating from it. It was almost alive. "This doesn't look like anything from our world," Lieutenant Bailey observed, her voice tinged with awe and fear. This is what he left behind." John stared at the fragment. The pieces were starting to come together. But as they stared at the object, a strange feeling washed over him. Something was watching them. He turned sharply. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he realized they weren't alone. There, standing at the edge of their camp, was the man. Silent. Watching. Waiting. The fragment in John's hand suddenly grew warm, then hot. He instinctively dropped it, watching as it rolled across the ground and landed at the man's feet. Without a word, the man bent down, picked it up, and held it in his hand. "Don't worry," the man's voice echoed softly. "You'll learn soon enough. All of you will." And with that, he disappeared again, just like before, leaving the soldiers paralyzed by the impossible. The squad sat in stunned silence as the man vanished once more. They had seen it before, but each time it happened, it felt more unreal, like they were trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. John's mind was a storm of thoughts, each one more chaotic than the last. He stared at the spot where the man had been standing, but there was no sign of him. No footprints in the sand, no disturbance in the air, nothing. "Is this real?" Sergeant Daniels muttered, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's like we're fighting ghosts." Bailey slapped her hand against the dirt in frustration. "We're not fighting ghosts, Daniels. Whatever this is, it's real. And it's not going away." John's jaw clenched. They were getting closer to the truth, but the closer they came, the more terrifying it became. What kind of being could just disappear like that? And why was it so focused on them? "We need to find out what he meant by, 'You'll learn soon enough,'" John said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but the weight of the situation was beginning to crack through his resolve. "We have no choice but to keep looking for answers. Whatever this is, it's bigger than anything we've ever faced." But the thought of pursuing this further terrified him. What if they were dealing with something they couldn't stop? What if this man, this thing, was beyond their power to understand, let alone fight? The next day, they set out once more, this time with a new sense of purpose. But as they trekked across the vast desert, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every crack of the dry earth beneath their boots, every whisper of wind in the air seemed like it carried an unspoken message. Then, just as John was about to call for a halt, one of the soldiers spotted something in the distance, a flicker of light. It was too small, too faint to be anything concrete, but it was enough to pull them toward it. The squad approached cautiously, weapons drawn. As they drew closer, the light grew brighter, and before long, they found themselves standing in front of what appeared to be an enormous rock formation. The stone itself shimmered under the sunlight, but it was the strange pattern on the surface that caught their attention. John stepped forward, examining the pattern. It looked like symbols, ancient, alien-like writing that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. "Is this some kind of message?" Bailey asked, her voice low, almost reverent. John didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel the significance of it deep in his bones. This wasn't just an artifact. This was something far beyond them. And the man's cryptic words echoed in his mind, "You'll learn soon enough." Suddenly, as if on cue, the air around them seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, and an unnatural stillness settled over the camp. They all turned in unison, their hearts pounding as they saw the man standing in front of them once again. But this time, something was different. He wasn't just watching them. He was waiting. John's mouth went dry as the man raised a hand, his eyes meeting John's with an intensity that sent a chill through him. You found the first piece of the puzzle. Now, you must solve it. The words were like a heavy weight, pressing down on their chests. John's grip tightened on his weapon, but there was no use in fighting. Not when they didn't even understand what they were up against. The man stepped forward, and this time, no one moved. It was as if their bodies were frozen in place, compelled by an unseen force. You think you can stop me, the man said, his voice now a low, menacing growl. But you're too late. You were always too late. The man's words sent a ripple of dread through the squad. What did he mean by too late? Were they already in the midst of something that couldn't be undone? John's pulse quickened. Who are you? The man smiled, the expression unsettling. I'm just a messenger. But soon, you will understand. All of you will. And just like that, the air around them seemed to twist and shimmer, and the man vanished again. But this time, they could hear something faint, almost like an echo. As the last remnants of the man's presence faded, John felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. The fear was still there, but now, there was something else. Something new. A sense of determination. We need to keep moving, he said, his voice steadier than it had been in days. We can't back down now. We're closer than ever. The truth is out there. And we're going to find it. But even as John spoke those words, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were dealing with was far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. And as the sun began to set on the desert horizon, he knew that they were running out of time. The truth was waiting for them. But the real question was, would they survive it? The desert was eerily silent that night. The wind had died down, leaving the squad alone with their thoughts. They sat around the campfire, each lost in their own mind, processing the strange events of the past few days. But John couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they were searching for were just beyond their reach. Suddenly, a voice cut through the silence. It was Bailey's, filled with a quiet urgency. John, we need to talk. John turned to face her, sensing the weight in her words. The rest of the squad looked up, their expressions mixed with curiosity and concern. About what? John asked, trying to mask the growing unease in his chest. Bailey glanced around, ensuring they were alone. I've been thinking. The man, this thing, he's not just some random person. There's something bigger going on here. And I think we're a part of it. John frowned. What are you talking about? Bailey lowered her voice. I did some research. Back home, I came across a theory about ancient civilizations, ones that disappeared without a trace. Some believe they didn't vanish, but were taken by something beyond our understanding. John's mind raced. Was this somehow connected to the man they had been chasing? Had they stumbled upon a conspiracy that stretched back centuries? Before he could speak, Sergeant Daniels interrupted, his voice filled with disbelief. You're saying all of this is some kind of alien intervention? Like we've been dragged into a bigger game we didn't sign up for? Bailey nodded slowly. Yes. And I think this isn't just about us. It's about humanity. This man, he's been telling us we're too late, like something's already set in motion. John felt a chill run down his spine. If what Bailey was saying was true, they were already too far in. There was no turning back now. The following morning, the squad set off once more, now with a singular purpose. But as they moved through the desert, something felt off. It wasn't just the heat or the endless stretch of sand, it was the way the air felt charged, like something big was about to happen. Then, in the distance, they saw it. A massive structure, unlike anything they had seen before. It rose from the sand, a towering monolith with strange markings etched into its surface. It glowed faintly, as if it held a life of its own. John's heart raced. This was it. This was the place the man had been leading them to. The squad approached cautiously, weapons drawn. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back, but they couldn't. They had come too far. When they reached the base of the structure, they found another symbol, one that matched the markings they had seen in the desert earlier. But this time, there was something different. The symbol was glowing brighter, pulsing with energy, as if waiting for something. Without thinking, John stepped forward and placed his hand on the symbol. Instantly, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air around them crackled with electricity. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep, resonating voice echoed through the air. It wasn't just from one direction, it came from everywhere. "You've arrived." Finally. John's heart skipped a beat. The voice, it was him. The man. "Who are you?" John shouted, his voice strained with both fear and frustration. "What do you want from us?" The voice answered, calm and unhurried. "I told you before. You were too late. This world is already in the hands of others." The ground trembled again, but this time, the squad could see it. The air seemed to bend and warp, revealing something beneath the surface. A vast, underground chamber, pulsating with a strange energy. John's blood ran cold. "What is that?" The voice responded, its tone almost mocking. "It's the heart of everything. And now, it belongs to those who control it." Without warning, the structure before them began to shift. The walls parted, revealing a dark, cavernous space filled with technology unlike anything they had ever seen, glowing devices, massive machines, and strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "This is it," Bailey whispered, her voice filled with awe and terror. "This is what he's been leading us to." The squad stepped into the chamber, the air thick with tension. Every step they took felt like they were walking into the unknown, into something far greater than any war or mission they had ever known. And then, in the center of the room, they saw it, the man. He was standing motionless, his eyes locked onto John's, his expression unreadable. "You've come," the man said, his voice now a low, eerie whisper. "But you can't stop it now. You've already been marked." John's mind raced. Marked? What did that mean? Before he could ask, the man's body began to shimmer and shift. It was like he was dissolving into thin air, his form rippling like water. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone. But the room, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, as if something was waiting for them to make the next move. John turned to his squad, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need to figure out how to stop this. Whatever it is, it's not over yet. And we're not going down without a fight." But as they gathered their courage, one question remained: could they really stop what had already begun? The squad stood in the center of the cavern, the air thick with the electric hum of the alien machinery. Their breath was shallow, their bodies tense, each man grappling with the weight of the moment. They had reached the heart of the mystery, but instead of answers, all they found was a deeper sense of confusion. John clenched his fists. "We're not leaving until we find out what this is and how to stop it." Bailey, her face pale but determined, nodded. "We've been led here for a reason. That man, whatever he was, he knew we'd come. And now, we have to stop whatever it is that's coming next." The machinery around them continued to pulse with eerie light, casting strange shadows across the walls. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if they were alive. John couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just in a structure, they were in a living organism, one that had been waiting for them. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently, and the walls shook, sending a shower of dust and debris raining down. The squad raised their weapons, eyes scanning the darkness, but there was nothing to see, yet the pressure in the air was suffocating. "What the hell was that?" Sergeant Daniels barked, his voice sharp with fear. Before anyone could respond, a figure appeared before them. It was the man, or at least, it looked like him. But something was different, something was wrong. His eyes glowed with an unearthly light, and his form seemed to flicker between solid and ethereal, as if he were existing in multiple dimensions at once. His voice echoed, distorted and hollow, reverberating through the cavern. "You should have never come," he said, his voice a mix of pity and menace. "Now, you've sealed your fate." John's mind raced. The man, they had been hunting him for days, and now they stood before him, no closer to understanding the full extent of his power. Whatever this was, it was beyond their comprehension. "We're not afraid of you," John said, though his voice betrayed the tension in his chest. "Tell us what this is. What's happening here?" The man's lips curled into a smile, though it wasn't a smile of victory. It was a smile of inevitability, as though he knew something they didn't, and it was too late to change the course. "You've seen the signs. The machines. The markings. The energy." His gaze swept over the squad. "It's all part of the plan. Humanity was never meant to have control. You were only ever the caretakers, the ones who would eventually give way to those who truly belong." A chill swept over John. He understood now, this wasn't just about them. It was about something far larger than their world, something beyond their time. You're saying we're just pawns?" Bailey asked, her voice trembling. The man nodded slowly. "You always were." John's heart pounded in his chest. This was more than an alien invasion. This was a reckoning, a moment in time where humanity's place on Earth was no longer secure. And they were standing at the center of it. "We have to stop this," John said, more to himself than anyone else. He wasn't sure what this was, but he knew it couldn't continue. The man's form shifted, growing more distorted as if the fabric of reality itself was bending around him. "You can't stop it. The energy is already here, flowing through everything. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Suddenly, the chamber erupted into chaos. The walls trembled violently, and the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing a deep, glowing abyss. From the depths, strange tendrils reached up, snaking their way toward the squad, as if the very earth itself was alive. Bailey's voice was filled with desperation. "We can't fight this. We need to run." But John stood his ground, eyes fixed on the man. "No. We finish this. We have to fight for our future." He rushed forward, weapon in hand, but the moment he took a step, the man's form shifted again. This time, he wasn't just standing in front of them, he was all around them, his voice echoing from every direction. "You think you can fight what's coming? It's already too late," the man said. "You've made your choice. You'll see soon enough." John's mind raced. What was the man talking about? What did he mean? In the distance, the structure began to pulse violently, its energy surging through the cavern. The ground shook again, sending the squad to their knees. But this time, John didn't move. He knew they were close, closer than they had ever been to understanding the truth. The man's form flickered again, and for a split second, his face seemed to shift. It wasn't the man they had been chasing. It wasn't even human. It was something else entirely, an entity, something older, more ancient than anything they could comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The lights dimmed, the trembling ceased, and the walls fell silent. The energy that had been so overpowering now dissipated, leaving only the sound of their breath in the still air. John stood frozen, his heart racing. What just happened? Bailey looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did we win? But before John could answer, the voice of the man, no, the entity, spoke once more, its tone strangely calm. You've only just begun to understand, it whispered. The real fight is yet to come. The days that followed were a blur. The squad had returned to their base, their minds weighed down by the encounter in the cavern. The horrors they had witnessed, the cryptic words of the man, or the entity, as they now called it, still echoed in their minds. Every moment was a reminder that whatever they thought they knew about the universe, about their place in it, was nothing more than an illusion. John sat alone in his room, staring at the map of the cavern that was now pinned to the wall. He traced his finger over the complex network of tunnels and chambers, his thoughts racing. What had they uncovered? What was the energy, and what did it mean for humanity? His mind kept returning to the one thing the entity had said: the real fight is yet to come. What did that even mean? What kind of enemy could possibly be worse than the one they had just faced? Bailey had gone into isolation, unable to process the enormity of what they had learned. Daniels had buried himself in work, trying to find a logical explanation for everything. But John couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they sought weren't on this world, and certainly not in any military database. The squad had been through hell together. They'd fought impossible odds. And yet, they had never been more uncertain about the future. One morning, as the sun rose over the barren landscape outside the base, a message came through the comm system. It was encrypted, but John knew it was from higher-ups. The message was simple: return to the cavern. We need to investigate further. John's heart sank. They had barely survived the last time. But he knew they couldn't refuse. The future of humanity might depend on what they discovered next. Back at the cavern, the energy was different this time. The air felt heavier, as if the very fabric of reality was starting to break apart. The squad moved carefully through the tunnels, each step weighed down by a sense of inevitability. As they reached the center of the cavern, the familiar hum of the alien machinery greeted them. But there was something new this time, something unsettling. The walls were covered in markings, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. And in the center of it all stood a figure they all recognized. It was the man. But now, he was not just a man. He was something more, something beyond human. Welcome, the voice echoed through the cavern, but this time it was calm, almost reassuring. I see you've come to understand. Or perhaps, you think you've understood. John stood tall, the weight of the moment pressing on him. What do you want from us? What is this energy? What does it mean for humanity? The man, or whatever he had become, looked at him with a gaze that seemed to pierce through him. You've always believed that you were in control. That you shaped your destiny. But you are merely a part of a greater whole. A cog in a machine far more intricate than you can imagine.